Welcome back to Never Did It. I'm Jake Ziegler, and I'm here with Brad Garoon. On Never Did It, we look back at the last 100 years of movie history in an effort to fill in some of our own movie blind spots. Today we're covering the year 2012, and we're going to be hitting a documentary and a financial thriller starring the one and only Richard Gere. Brad, do you want to talk about the documentary first, or do you want to talk about how handsome Richard Gere is first?
Let's talk about Richard Gere first, because I have a few things that are hot on my mind that I want to... one, Richard Gere, underrated actor. Very, very good in Arbitrage. So in the movie Arbitrage, which was Nicholas Jarecki's directorial debut. Wow. I mean, okay, so what do I know of Richard Gere? Not a ton, because when I was growing up, he was the Pretty Woman guy. He was the runaway bride guy. And then for me, he fell off completely. Oh, I saw that movie where he got cheated on and he killed the guy. Yeah. Unfaithful. Yeah, it's pretty good. Good thriller. I liked it a lot. Very sexy movie.
I remember not liking it, but I only saw it probably the once it came out because Diane Lane got Oscar nominated for it. But I remember not liking it.
She was hotter than fire in that movie, so
no argument there. Yeah,
really stuck with me. And then I got nothing from him. And then a couple of weeks ago, he did an interview on the Ringer podcast to promote Oh Canada, his new movie by Paul Schrader, excuse me. And he talked about like a movie he did with Joseph Cedar, which I'm interested in seeing, haven't seen, but we're both big Joseph Cedar fans. So he's clearly been working this whole time just on smaller things. And this is one of the smaller things he worked on. Indie thrill. Is Lionsgate indie? It is, right? And
yeah.
Maybe they're considered a major film studio now, but if watching it, you're like, wow, this movie was made on a budget.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Big stars, and that's about all they spent the money on.
Yep, definitely.
Certainly not the score. He's putting in an A-list performance in this movie. In fact, there are a few scenes where I'm like, they should have gotten him to play Donald Trump. He was too old to play young Donald Trump, but he's essentially doing Donald Trump with more empathy in this movie.
Yep.
So that was pretty cool. Well, tell us what it's about and why you recommended it.
Well, it's, 2012, we're getting up to a point where, like, you and I have both seen a lot of the movies from then, so it gets a little bit, tougher to find ones that you hadn't seen. But this one, like I said, it's a smaller movie, kind of had flown under the radar, but I remember seeing it when it came out because there was some chatter that, maybe he was a dark horse candidate to get nominated for an Oscar, or at least get recognized at some awards. And I think he did. I think he had gotten maybe some, like, Critics Award notices or something. So, he had definitely been noticed for this performance and had been lauded in some places. And I remember seeing it at the time it came out, and I had that same reaction, like, wow, this is a good movie, and Richard Gere is just really killing it in this role. And it had probably been since it came out, so I definitely wanted to watch it again. And these kind of smart adult thrillers are a little bit fewer and far between these days, so I thought it would be a cool one to go back and see. And we're going to spoil this movie because it's going to be really hard to talk about without spoiling certain events of it. So if you don't want to know too much about the plot, fast forward or watch the movie and then come back. Richard Gere plays a kind of billionaire hedge fund type manager who's got a couple of different things going on. He's about to close a big deal to sell his company, but he doesn't have enough capital in his accounts to make that deal go through. So he's borrowed a large sum of money from an associate, and the deal is taking longer to go through. So the associate really wants his money back, but the deal hasn't gone through yet. Richard Gere wants the deal to go through before he puts the money back. So he's got pressure mounting on him from that. And also, of course, since he's a hedge fund type guy, he's obviously cheating on his wife with a younger woman, even though his wife is Susan Sarandon. Like, who needs to cheat on Susan Sarandon? But that's just the kind of guy that these guys are. So he's cheating on his wife with a younger woman, a French art dealer who he's also supporting her gallery financially. And one night when he's with his mistress, they're in New York, of course, and he's driving upstate, and he gets a little sleepy behind the wheel. He flips the car, and she ends up dying in this crash. And instead of calling 911, because that would get himself in trouble, he splits. And he tries to cover his tracks. He, calls someone to give him a ride home, and, he just tries to cover up the whole thing, basically, because he doesn't want to queer the deal that he's got going on, and he doesn't want to mess up anything with his family. And so he kind of involves a younger gentleman. I can't remember the name, but it's the actor Nate Parker. He calls him because the guy's father was Richard Gere's former driver, and he had taken care of the father as he was dying. So the guy kind of owes him a favor. So that guy comes and picks him up. So now he's involved in the story. And then a detective wants to investigate the death, of course, at the car crash scene. And the detective's played by Tim Roth, who's amazing in this. And the detective basically, he's smart. He knows Richard Gere's guilty, and he really just wants to prove that. And so you've got all these kind of moving parts coming together. And of course, I haven't even mentioned either that Richard Gere's daughter is the CFO of his company, so he's kind of left her in the lurch too if anything goes wrong with this deal. So there's just really a lot of little things going on in this movie, but it never feels like too much either. Like it all feels pertinent, and it all feels relevant to what's going on at any given time, and they never feel like they're spending too much time in any one part either. It all feels like part of a really coherent, cogent whole. Say too much about like what the plot is, but there's just a lot going on in this movie.
So I agree that it never feels like there's too much going on, but I will say the greenness of the director shines through in that all those movies do kind of feel like they might be better if they were the focal point of the movie. So they work as parts of a whole. The movie is very entertaining, and at no point do you get bored. Gere is great. Sarandon's great. Nate Parker is really good. If you're not familiar with him, he directed the remake of Birth of a Nation, the turning on its head of Birth of a Nation. You know who else is really, really good is Stuart Margolin, who's like a famous 70s actor who plays Sid, the lawyer.
Yeah.
Really great.
He's fantastic in this, yeah.
Yeah. Just like comes in little bits, steals every scene he's in. And then Reggie Cathy, who's like a really famous, he's in like every HBO show ever, plays, Jimmy is the character's name, the Nate Parker character, plays Jimmy's lawyer. He's great in his little scenes, and when like there's a lot of legalese going on because Tim Roth's cop is kind of crooked, and he's trying to do whatever he can to finally pin down a billionaire in one of these, financial schemes, and this death, this involuntary manslaughter seems to be the way that he can do it.
And he's guilty. He is guilty.
Well, it's interesting because he's guilty and Jimmy is guilty of helping him, but they have no real evidence. So even though he's guilty, he has to trump up all this evidence. The stuff there's a scene between Tim Roth and the judge that ends up, spoiler alert again, dismissing the case out of hand because Tim Roth has tainted all this evidence to try to make this stuff go through. There's this great scene between them where the judge is like, I know he's guilty. You can't do it this way. And then Tim Roth gives this cool, in his New York accent, which he's surprisingly pretty good at, given he's a British actor. Tim Roth is like, we're never going to get them. We're like never, ever going to get them this way. And, we're going through right now this conversation about the murder of a healthcare CEO and the response to it and how people, are being very cold and callous about a murder that took place on the streets of New York City. And you can see that frustration in this movie. It's obviously been going on a long time as these people get richer and richer, and there's just no consequences for any of their actions. This movie very deftly handles that feeling of anxiety and frustration in Tim Roth's character. What I also thought was interesting, you mentioned Richard Gere borrows a large sum of money from his friend Jeffrey. The large sum of money is $500 million.
412, yeah. I remember that. Yep.
It's an absurd amount of money that just got transferred over. And this is because Gere spent all this money. There's so many little details. I think the movie may have like a few too many details. The reason Gere's family is in trouble, or his fortune is in trouble, is he spent all his money investing in copper mines in Russia. But of course, over the last couple of decades, Russia has become more and more nationalist. And this came out before the invasion of Crimea in 2014. So it was interesting that they were like seeing this happening even before it really like exploded on the international stage, because Russia was in a friendlier place with us during like the early Obama years. And it was a focal point of the 2012 election with Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, where they talked about Obama being too friendly to Russia and Romney wanted to be much harder on Russia. In any event, this movie gets into that because as Russia becomes more nationalist and more hardline under Putin, access to the copper that he had invested in becomes invisible, and he loses a ton of money. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So he defrauds this other company and his shareholders by borrowing the money so that the audit looks like he has the money to back it up. Yep. What I found most interesting was the scene between Gere and the guy who's trying to buy his company, who's perfectly cast. I don't know who this actor is. Let's look him up real quick.
Yeah, because I love that. If you weren't going to mention, I was going to mention that scene too.
Mayfield. So is this guy Graydon Carter? Yeah. Oh, that's Graydon Carter's real haircut. Okay. He has bizarre billionaire hair. And Graydon Carter's I'd say he's not much of an actor, but he filled this role perfectly. So the whole movie, Gere's character, who we haven't said yet, his name's Robert Miller. He's looking for Mayfield so he can finish this deal. You mentioned like they're taking too long to finish the deal. And he finally finds him at a restaurant after being dodged and dodged and dodged. And it turns out that the reason Mayfield is taking a long time to do the deal is Mayfield's company is also in a lot of trouble, and he just wants a lower price on the deal. He doesn't care about any of this other stuff. And they have this battle of wits back and forth where Gere is just like eating Mayfield's lunch. Miller is eating Mayfield's lunch. And in the end, they make a deal, and then they both tell each other like, Gere's like, I would have taken way lower, and Mayfield's like, I would have spent way more. I watched it with Annie, and she was like, this feels so unbelievable to me. And I was like, you know what's sad is this feels totally believable to me.
Oh, me too.
This is just how deals get done. Two people just jaw-jacking at dinner. Mm-hmm. And then later, a second audit is done where it is revealed to Mayfield that Gere doesn't have the money, and Mayfield's like, what difference does this make to me?
Yeah.
It's all crooked, right?
Yeah, he goes, I don't see anything wrong with this.
What is the tragedy of that is Gere could have told the truth in the beginning, done his like 4 years in jail, or even probably cut a plea, and would have been fine.
Yep.
And all of this didn't need to happen.
It's estranged from his daughter because of this. Like, he
Yeah.
has this, like, she completely loses faith and trust in him. They have that great scene on the park bench too, where he tries to justify everything to her, and she's like I said, you can just completely see, like, she loses everything, in him. Like, she's at that point, like, he's not even her dad anymore. Like, it's completely gone.
She's played by Britt Marling. It's the best scene in the movie. This is also a very New York-y movie. It's so funny. So my problem with the movie is that you've got these amazing performances, and then it feels like I was watching one of those Dave Bautista, action schlock movies in the way it was filmed. It just felt very cheap. The music is bad. The blocking is bad. The scene setting is bad. The cameras that they used didn't seem like they were movie grade cameras. It felt like I was watching the scenes between Tim Roth and Nate Parker felt like I was watching an episode of The Wire, which is a great show. But when you're watching it, you're like, I'm watching a television show. And so you have all these beautiful on location New York shots, which is not cheap, very expensive. And it's just clear like where the money in the movie went. It went to Gere and Sarandon's salary and probably Tim Roth's. And it went to and Gere's a Buddhist, so maybe he doesn't charge that much.
Yeah, right.
And it went to probably shooting on location in all these cool New York locales. Like Central Park. What a great shot that was. That's where the fight between Marling, who's great in this, and Gere took place. It just made me wish that they spent a little more money and had maybe a little bit more of a competence mean. Nicholas Jarecki is famous because he was the guy who advised on the hacking scenes in the movie Hackers, which is notorious for having bad hacking scenes. He was 15 years old when that happened.
Yeah.
Luckily, this movie feels a lot more real than Hackers. I love Hackers. Don't get me wrong. I love Hackers.
I don't think I've seen it since it came out. I remember seeing it at the theater, but I don't think I've seen it since.
It's so fun and dumb. So there's a lot to like in Arbitrage, but you have to go into it either not being a snob like I was, or not knowing what you're looking at. Like I bet if you don't watch 500 movies a year, you're not going to notice this stuff. And so I probably would have enjoyed it more if I'd seen fewer movies.
Yeah, I mean, I was able to turn off a lot of those things that you mentioned because all those things are true. But I was just completely taken in by the performances, Gere especially. And I'm a Richard Gere fan. Like, I've seen many more movies as like you said, he's the Pretty Woman guy, he's the Runaway Bride guy. He became kind of a romantic comedy, I guess. Is Runaway Bride a comedy? I don't know.
Yeah, they're both comedies.
Okay, yeah, I've never seen it. And Pretty Woman I've seen, but like, I don't know, I don't really have any, it's whatever. But like,
I like those movies.
I've never seen Runaway Bride, and I like Pretty Woman fine, but I haven't seen it in forever. I don't know. George Costanza tries to rape her, and I have a hard time with that because he's George. I don't know, but
I get it.
Yeah, but I have. Other Richard Gere movies, like I love him in Chicago. He's so good in that, and then he's in the Terrence Malick movie Days of Heaven, which I've always. I think we have that. Is that what we're doing for 19?
I think so.
Yes, we are. Okay, good. So we'll come back to Richard Gere for that one, and Primal Fear is another Richard Gere movie that I always really liked, which was the first thing, kind of Edward Norton really got noticed for as well. So I've had a number of Richard Gere movies that I've really liked over the years, and this was, probably one of the better performances I've seen him give. So if you can really kind of ignore some of the other stuff and just gets kind of sucked into the performances, there's some really rewarding things about this movie, and it's just kind of an under the radar adult legal financial thriller type of movie that they don't make a lot of these type of movies. So if that's something that you're interested in, it's definitely worth seeking out. It's streaming in a lot of places.
Oh, a lot, every place basically. The other piece is this one's good for the Gen Z kids who are afraid of sex scenes, because even though it is kind of a throwback to those sexy thrillers of the 90s, the one sex scene is incredibly tame and cuts off very early.
Yeah, it shows nothing. Yeah.
That was the one thing I'm like, oh, they hired an Alexandra Daddario type, and then we didn't see anything. What a bummer.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I gave it 3 stars. It's probably more of a 3.5 star movie. There's a lot to enjoy in there. Jake, I know you like this one a lot.
Yeah, I gave it 4. I have it at 4 stars, and it's, again, just on the strength of the performances and the way some of the things resolve themselves. Like you said, just that scene with Tim Roth and the judge. I love how that plays out, and just how that, like, he's not getting that satisfaction that he wants. And I read Ebert's review of this too after I watched it, and I just love how it he compared it to, Hitchcock had this formula of the innocent man wrongfully accused, and the suspense is in how is he going to prove himself innocent, and this is the complete opposite of that, where it's a guilty man rightfully accused, but the suspense is in, is he going to get away with it still? And it's a whole different kind of suspense. And I was, really sucked into that. So 4-star movie for me.
There's a scene where Tim Roth is harassing a DA to give him a warrant that he hasn't the evidence for. And Annie turns to me and goes, am I rooting for Tim Roth? Am I rooting for Richard Gere? What? I'm like, you're just watching the movie. There's no root. Everyone's bad.
Right. Everyone's kind of bad. I mean, yes, Richard Gere should pay for what he did, but he's Richard Gere, so he's so like handsome and charismatic and smart, and you kind of want to, there's complicated feelings about it.
Especially the part where he realizes that Tim Roth has that he and the Tim Roth and the DA have like cheated. Then you're like, ooh, this became a whole different, like almost like heisty kind of movie where he figures out, or a legal thriller where he figures out the way to outsmart the other side. One other thing, you mentioned a bunch of Critics' Choice Awards. I don't know about those, but Gere was nominated for a Golden Globe.
Golden Globe. That's right. Yep, he was.
It's a kind of a trashy movie, and the Golden Globes are kind of a trashy award show, so it makes sense.
Especially back then. Yeah, I think they're kind of building themselves back up. You know, they're under new ownership over the last couple of years and stuff, so I think they're trying to build themselves up to respectability. But yeah, even back then they were nominating Johnny Depp for every piece of crap movie he put out. Like, did anybody remember The Tourist? How did that movie get nominated for anything? With him and Angelina Jolie?
Yeah, I don't know. This year I like the Golden Globe slate. The thing they're getting dinged for is a thing I actually like. Pamela Anderson got nominated for The Last Showgirl.
Are they getting dinged for that?
I think just because one, no one's seen it, and two, they're like, guys, what are you doing? There's all these other. I'm like, there's a lot of movies. Spread it around.
I just thought people were happy for her comeback, and we're into that.
I'm happy for her comeback. I'm happy Batista's got like a big role, and this is supposed to be very good, and I'm very excited to see it.
Yeah. My wife and I are excited for that.
Okay, cool. So that is Arbitrage. I gave you Jiro Dreams of Sushi, a documentary about Jiro Ono, who is probably the most famous sushi chef to ever live at this point. Mostly because of this movie. I think when the movie starts, he's 85. He's still working nonstop at his tiny little, very expensive $30,000 yen, which typically equates to $300 per seating sushi omakase meal bar, which is just a small restaurant inside of a subway station because Japan is cool. And his two sons and their jobs as sushi chefs, their trajectories as sushi chefs, and the other people who work at his restaurant, including Daisuke Nakazawa, who has since opened a very famous sushi restaurant in New York that I still haven't gone to, frustratingly. And it's about like the sushi industry a bit too. What did you think of Jiro Dreams of Sushi, one of my top 5 documentaries of all time?
Really, really loved this movie. I watched it with my wife and one of her sisters, and we all really, really enjoyed it. We're really taken by it. And I should mention right away that I do not like sushi, and I have tried it, many times over the years. Like, I continue to try it every so often, just like, all right, this time, this is going to be the time. Like, I want to like sushi. I really want to, but like, and I keep trying it. It's just like, it's not for me. So I have made the effort many times over the years. But just to watch anyone like him who is Shokunin, anyone who's, that high level of expert at anything in their craft, I think is going to be interesting no matter what it is and whether or not I like the food or anything. I mean, I think that's just really interesting to see what they do. And I mentioned this in my Letterboxd review. For me to be interested in something like this, when I'm so like philosophically opposed, like everything, like you have to live your job 24 hours a day. Like, oh God, that sounds awful. And like, you have to work your job until 100. Like, oh my God, I would retire tomorrow if I could. Like, I don't agree with like any of the way this guy lives his life, but I find him so fascinating, and just the way his philosophies apply to his business and the way he runs the business and the way he trains his apprentices and the way he trains his sons. It seems like he's such a hard-ass guy for so long, but then he really gives credit to all of these people. There's that line he has towards the end. There's like, everyone gives me all the credit, but really the work's 90% done by the time it gets to me, sort of thing. So he really does give them credit, but he is also very hard on these guys. He's a fascinating guy. And really, I learned a lot about the sushi industry, the way they get the tuna, like they show the whole tuna market and everything. And all of these guys too, it's so interesting to me. So many of them were like, this is not about money. It's not about money. It's not about money. Everybody kept saying it's not about money. Like, it's just for the art of doing the sushi. And like, that is so cool. I mean, I wish I could have ever lived my life that way, but instead I'm working an office job for, however much money I can get sort of thing. So it's a really cool insight into living life a completely different way than I have ever and will ever be able to.
Yeah, let's be a little bit honest. They're talking to a camera. So some of it's that.
Sure.
It's a polite society.
But I'm sucked into the, like I'm going with it in terms of the movie.
Right. You mentioned the thing that I grasped onto most from what you said is you mentioned, you would think he would be such a hard ass because he works such a strict life and has such a high end, very little room for error business. When I was watching it with my in-laws and I looked over and I'm like, what I love about this is these people are in such a high stress situation and they're all actually pretty nice to each other.
Yeah. It's not the bear.
It's not the bear. There's no screaming. There is like criticism, but at the end of most of the criticism, it's like when Jiro's son, who now just as of last year became the head chef because Jiro continued to work until he was 94 years old, or no, 99
98.
years old, 98 years old. Yeah, this movie came out more than 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Continued to work until he was 98 years old. His son, you see him critiquing Nakazawa's sushi. He's like, "Oh, you need to slice that a little thinner. It's good." And then later, like, there's too much wasabi. I'm crying. I like it. Like, you know, at the end, these guys are all they're with each other all the time. So there's a lot of camaraderie among them too, which is really great. But my favorite was Matsuhiro Yamamoto is sort of the de facto narrator. There's no narrator. The whole movie's in Japanese. There's not a word of English, even though it's an American filmmaker who made it, David Gelb, who now I want to go and watch all of Chef's Table, which he produced for Netflix. It's just a food series that he did. But Yamamoto is like a hardcore critic in Japan, a food critic in Japan. And he the whole time is just like, this food is a miracle.
Yeah.
This isn't just food. It's an actual miracle. It's so simple. My father-in-law, who I think is like you, probably doesn't like sushi very much, or maybe he does, I don't know. But he looked at these and he said, you know, it's so funny. It actually doesn't look that appetizing. And I looked over at my wife and I was like, yes, it does.
Yeah.
I want to eat this food so bad. And it just goes to show that if you're not like in this cult of sushi, which this movie helped get me into, yeah, maybe the food doesn't look that good because it's just a piece of raw fish. You know, it looks artful, but it might not look appetizing. I didn't start eating sushi until 2008 when I moved to New York, and I was dragged into it by a girl I was dating. Thanks, Stacy. There's a lot of levels to sushi, and this movie is the highest level. And omakase is an expensive habit to get into. But when you start eating the sushi, you eat these, you know, you eat a roll. Typically, you're like eating them in these little rolls covered in seaweed. And up here, this nigiri that they're serving everyone, you know, sushi on rice, it's a different kind of thing. And you're eating one piece at a time and you don't think you're going to get full, and you get so full. It's so much fun, but you can only really do it if you're like us, who are like kind of normal guys. You can only do it every once in a while, and you have to have developed a taste for it if you're American. It reminded me of another movie, a short film called Flower Punk that came out in 2019, and it's about, also in Japan, about Azuma Makoto, and he does basically the same thing but with flower arranging. It's so cool.
That is cool.
There's a guy on Twitter. He's like the menswear guy. Just Google like the menswear guy Twitter. And he did this great thread about why Japan has more artisans than America. And a lot of it is because it's a walking culture, not a driving culture. I forget the name of the city, but there's a city in Japan that was the last city to be de-occupied by Americans after World War II. And it's the most car-centric city. Tokyo is not a car-centric city. Kyoto is not a car-centric city. So because there's so much foot traffic, you have the opportunity to do smaller, more specific artisan businesses because people will walk by and come in. You just can't do that here because people aren't going to just drive by and come in. If you're driving by, you're driving by. You're not going to stop. So yeah, it's just interesting how culture evolved over thousands of years to get to where we are now. And there's all these artisans there still, even now in this age of internet where I'm sure it's depleting some. You just can't have that here. I mean, there are American artisans, but it's not the same.
Yeah, it's just different over here.
I'm glad you liked it. What can I ask? I've been meaning to ask because as I was watching this, I was thinking, what are my favorite documentaries? And 3 popped to my head right away. Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, or is it Won't You Be My Neighbor? Which one is the documentary?
Won't You Be My Neighbor is the documentary. I always have to think about it.
Yeah, that's annoying because I don't like the narrative one, the Tom Hanks one, as much.
Well, I like it, but yeah, definitely not as much. I mean, if I had to pick one, it's the documentary 10 times out of 10.
10 times out of 10. For me, I think that's my favorite documentary. And then this, Jiro Dreams of Sushi, and Murder Ball, I think are my 3 favorite documentaries. And probably just because, 1, formalistically, they're very entertaining. And 2, they're about people who are incredible at their jobs. You know, it's about the American Paralympic rugby team, Jiro Ono and Mr. Rogers. What could be better? What do you like if you had to just pick 3 of your favorite? They don't have to be your 3 favorite, but 3 of your favorite documentaries. What are they? And like what connects them?
Oh gosh, I should have been prepared for this. Boy, I do come back often to Roger and Me, which I know Michael Moore sucks. You know, or even like Bowling for Columbine was like a big one because that was like kind of the first, I mean, that was the first documentary I ever saw in the theater. And that was like a big deal, you know, when it came out. And that was kind of where I first really started understanding, you know, documentaries and stuff. So like, I mean, Michael Moore was really the first documentarian that I discovered, like saw more than one of his movies and understood, you know, like who he was. So that was kind of a big one. You know, both of those were big for me. And Fahrenheit 9/11, you know, I kind of discovered those all kind of right because Fahrenheit 9/11 came out kind of right after Bowling for Columbine, and you know, I kind of watched Roger and Me kind of right around that same time. So those 3 I kind of lumped together, you know, and really discovering, you know, that a documentarian can be a character in his movies as well. So, you know, say what you will about Michael Moore now, and I've got plenty, but those were definitely, I can't deny the impact that those had on me when they came out. And also music documentaries have been big for me too. I'll talk about about in a little bit when we do our top 10 list, but Searching for Sugar Man, so that was, which is just an incredible story, just, amazing, and I love that guy's music so much. I mean, the music has stayed with me for these years. My wife and I still listen to him, pretty consistently. And when we've covered on the podcast here, we talked about The Act of Killing and, Look of Silence. I think those are, just kind of incredible, unique looks. And then there's a Vietnam documentary that came out in the 70s called Hearts and Minds that always really stuck with me too. I'm not really sure if there's a connecting thread between all these, but those are the ones, that kind of just jump out at me right off the bat. And also I know another one that you love, Stories We Tell, I thought really, really moved me when I saw that, and really stirred something inside me when I saw that too. So, I mean, I could, if I thought about this more, I could go on and on with documentaries that have really done something to me.
I love all the movies you just mentioned. Stories We Tell is great. All of Michael Moore's, those three movies are great. Not all. I mean, I think Sicko is like a little bit dragging. I think I agree with what he's saying, but I saw that one in the theater and I was like, this isn't Fahrenheit 9/11. This is something else. Searching for Sugar Man, I saw in the theater also and thought was unreal. He passed away recently. Very sad.
Yeah.
Man, Sarah Polley should do more documentaries. I think she's doing
do more movies in general.
I think she's doing something like Bambi next. I think she's doing the live action Bambi.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Let's see. Let's confirm before we taint the good name of Sarah Polley. In 2023, she was revealed to be in talks for Bambi, but in 2024, it never came to fruition, and she is no longer attached. Baruch Hashem. Okay, we're in good shape. Dodged a bullet there. Yeah, she's awesome. Women Talking, so good.
Oh, that was amazing. Yeah. And I mean, her performance, we did The Sweet Hereafter on the podcast. She's an accomplished actor. She also has directed a movie called Away From Her, starring Julie Christie, which gave an amazing performance. I mean, Sarah Polley is an amazingly talented, and I think she doesn't often get the credit. I think she kind of flies under the radar a little bit. But yeah, she's incredible.
Let's do our top 10s, shall we? Because I believe Jiro Dreams of Sushi was not even on the short list for...
It was not. I'm a little surprised that year, and I don't know. There wasn't a long list back then either. So I didn't see if maybe they didn't submit it or what happened there. But I mean, there's hundreds of documentaries that come out every year, so you just never know what's going to tickle the fancy of the committee. But yeah, it did not make the short list that year. But there were some really good documentaries that came out that year. So
well, let's do our top 10s. I'll throw in a couple of honorable mentions. Searching for Sugar Man is an honorable mention of mine for 2012. Wolf Children. So this is an animated movie by Mamoru Hosoda, who is a pretty interesting director. I don't love all of his movies, but we're going to be covering one of them later in this podcast, The Girl Who Leapt Through Time for 2006.
Cool.
But Wolf Children is my favorite movie of his. Skyfall, the second best Daniel Craig James Bond movie, in my opinion. Seven Psychopaths, Martin McDonagh's least celebrated movie. I think it's a lot of fun.
Fair. I mean, I like it, but it's probably fair.
Yeah, got to give a shout out to Spielberg's Lincoln, which I liked a lot, but didn't love as like other things. But it's Spielberg. It made my top 20 list. It's number 14 on my list. All right, so my number 10, Ben Affleck's Argo. It's a great thriller about a group of Americans trying to get out of Iran, and it's basically a heist movie because they're trying to like steal these people. This fake movie thing going on to steal these people out of Iran, and the final scene on the airplane is so tense.
And even when you know how it ends,
yeah,
even then it's still incredible. Yeah,
really good. Hate to say his name, but my number 9 is David O. Russell's Silver Linings Playbook. This movie kind of kicked into high gear my love affair with Bradley Cooper. I just think it's so much fun. Jennifer Lawrence is delightful in it. This was like a big comeback for De Niro after a lot of stinky movies. Some people think Silver Linings Playbook's a stinky movie. They're wrong.
Yeah, they're wrong.
Chris Tucker also had like a cool comeback in this. He's great in this movie. I really, really like Silver Linings Playbook, about a guy with some demons and mental problems, another girl on the wrong side of the tracks trying to win a dance contest. It's pretty fun. My number 8 is Andrew Dominic, who has been lambasted recently for Blonde, but he's also the director of the much celebrated assassination of Jesse James, Killing Them Softly, starring Brad Pitt. Just a really, really great movie about hitmen, basically. We know they don't exist, but they existed in this. Hitmen, their relationship to the mob, and Brad Pitt and Scoot McNairy, Ben Mendelsohn, and James Gandolfini, rest in peace. So great in this one. Oh, and Ray Liotta also, who passed away. Yeah, wonderful in Killing Them Softly.
Blonde sucks, but Killing Them Softly is really good.
Yeah. Number 7, we're still waiting for her return. It's Catherine Bigelow's Zero Dark 30. A lot of people don't like this movie because of its like jingoism, but this movie is incredible. It's about the CIA and Marines going in and killing Osama bin Laden. It stars Jessica Chastain in probably her best performance ever, and not what she won the Oscar for. I haven't seen, what is it called? Calamity Jane? Tammy Faye.
It's fine.
It was directed by David Wayne. Oh no, Michael Showalter.
Yeah.
What a bizarre thing to have happened.
Yeah, and it's a totally okay movie, and like at the end of the day, I'm fine with her having an Oscar because of performances like this. But yeah, it's an okay movie.
Zero Dark 30 is a great movie. People don't like it also just because it suggests that torture gave us the testimony that got us to finding bin Laden. Like I said, though, amazing performance from Jessica Chastain. Jason Clarke and Kyle Chandler are great in this. Chris Pratt is pretty good in a small but important role. Mark Strong, always great. Love Zero Dark 30.
Yeah, and the jingoism and all the stuff like that captures the feeling of what was happening, at the time. I mean, that's not inaccurate to say, what was happening. That's how it felt.
For sure. And the people who are portrayed in this movie are now, some of them, Twitter nightmares, who are just like the worst of the worst kind of Americans on Twitter. But like, that's who was portrayed in the movie. So people would love those people to not be portrayed in movies. What are you going to do?
Right. That's a whole different discussion. I don't want to get into it.
Yeah. I haven't seen this movie in a long time, but Ben Zeitlin's Beast of the Southern Wild is my number 6. I don't know how to pronounce her name. Quvenzhané?
Quvenzhané, I think.
Thank you. Quvenzhané Wallis is the star. She was, I think, 8 years old when this movie came out.
Sounds right, yeah.
Incredible child performance. One of the best child performances you'll ever see about this little girl living in Louisiana.
In the bathtub.
In the bathtub, which is the name of their little area.
Yep.
Incredible movie. If you want to see a girl who honestly should have been like the biggest thing, check it out. She's also, she went on to play Annie in a pretty poor production of Annie. And she's in 12 Years a Slave, but very, very small role. And the first Trolls, I guess, but I didn't know that.
Oh, I've seen that movie a million times. I didn't know that.
My number 5, am I at now? Yeah, my number 5 is Jiro Dreams of Sushi. We've talked about that a lot. I like Jiro Dreams of Sushi so much that it's in my 2011 list and my 2012 list. My number 4 is a movie that Jake mentioned earlier. It's Stories We Tell. So I guess that's one, and I should have mentioned that in my top favorite movies, but it didn't match what brings my documentaries together, because this is a movie that Sarah Polley made about her own story, finding out who her birth parents or her birth father is, and her like Jewish heritage and things like that. She's a character in the movie, so it didn't work in my story about documentaries, but an incredible documentary. Sarah Polley's an amazing filmmaker. My number 3 is Moonrise Kingdom by Wes Anderson. I think it's my favorite Wes Anderson movie, about a bunch of kids at summer camp, a little boy who falls in love with a girl, a scout camp rather. He runs away with her. The families freak out. It's one of my favorite Bill Murray performances. It is my favorite Bruce Willis performance, which is interesting given what my number 2 is. Edward Norton's great in this. Frances McDormand is great in this. The kids are great in this. There's nothing not to like. It's such a sweet movie. Mm-hmm. Peak Wes Anderson for me. My number 2 is Looper. Speaking of Bruce Willis, one of my favorite sci-fi movies of all time. You've got Joseph Gordon-Levitt in a lot of prosthetics to play a younger version of Bruce Willis. It's a time travel movie where they're both hitmen and they end up at odds with each other over Bruce Willis coming back in time to kill the person who would in the future kill his wife and start this awful crime syndicate. It's a Western, actually, just like takes place on this farm, Emily Blunt's farm. And the little boy, who's played by Pierce Gagnon, might be Gagnon, but the little boy is also very good. Not as good as Quvenzhané in Quvenzhané Wallis in Beast of the Southern Wild, but very good as a creepy little boy who will grow up to be a mob boss in the future. And you've got also a nice little side performance, tragic role for Paul Dano early in the film.
Oh, that's right.
And then my number 1 is Thomas Vinterberg's The Hunt, starring Mads Mikkelsen, about a guy who is wrongfully accused of being a pedophile, and how his town turns on him, how he tries to stay sane and clear his name, which has one of the best endings I've ever seen in a movie, where even though, spoiler alert, he's cleared his name, the town clearly doesn't all care. I think Thomas Vinterberg is an incredible filmmaker, and this is my favorite film of his.
I love that movie too, but it was 2013 in the States, so it won't appear on my list. But gosh, we are going to have a lot of crossover on our lists. I actually I do documentaries separate from feature lists, so I won't do my entire doc list, but I do want to just mention my top 5 documentaries real quick. And most of them we've already mentioned, so I won't take long. My number 5 is a documentary about the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei. It's called Ai Weiwei Never Sorry. Just very cool look at him and his art. My number 4 is a movie about the Detroit Fire Department. It's called Burn, just about the difficulties the Detroit Fire Department has gone through just with all the burning buildings in Detroit, especially in the, it came out, obviously in 2012. So it was a difficult time for that fire department.
We should mention the reason that happened. There was a ton of abandoned buildings in Detroit because of white flight and then just economic despair in the city. People always make fun of Detroit for being such a shithole. It's actually a pretty great city, especially in the last few years. It has made an incredible comeback. The icon of Detroit's failure, the train station has been completely renovated into a tourist attraction now. So highly recommend people give Detroit a second chance. But yeah, at the time, these houses were burning down, and also terrible crimes were happening in them, in these abandoned houses. So that was real. I haven't seen that movie. I'm going to check that out now.
You would really like it. It's very, very cool. My number 3 then is the aforementioned Jiro Dreams of Sushi. Yeah, just an incredible documentary. My number 2 is one that I know you have seen, also called The Gatekeepers. You remember The Gatekeepers?
I don't offhand. Tell me what it's about. Maybe I'll remember.
It's about the former heads of the Shin Bet.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, I know someone who was in it. So yeah,
right. You know one of the guys. So yeah, I know you've definitely seen that one. I remember talking about that with you. Just incredible documentary about things that I did not know anything about at the time I saw it. So really, really interesting. And then my number 1 of that year, as we talked earlier, is Searching for Sugar Man. Just a great documentary, great story, great music. Yeah, and then we lost Rodriguez just recently. So R.I.P. Sixto Rodriguez.
So Stories We Tell was 2013 for you?
Yep, that came out in the States in 2013. Yep, and definitely, I don't remember. I'd have to look. I think, then Active Killing would have been my number 1 doc of 2013. I think Stories We Tell would be my number 2. I mean, those are 2 all-timers. With my narratives, I'll mention a couple of honorable mentions, a few that made your list, like Moonrise Kingdom is in my honorable mention. Not the biggest Wes Anderson fan, but I really like this one. Very, very cool. Good Wes Anderson stuff. I love Wreck-It Ralph. That came out that year. Cabin in the Woods was that year. Looper, also I really, really like. That's in my honorable mentions. The First Avengers, in my honorable mention that year. That's a lot of fun. And there's a cool Jake Gyllenhaal cop movie called End of Watch that I feel like has been completely forgotten, but I really, really liked that movie. And then one that may have appeared on your list for 2011, but it came out in the States the next year, is an Israeli film called Footnote that I think is really very good.
Yeah, Footnote's great. That's also Joseph Cedar, who we mentioned earlier in this episode. I just want to give one more honorable mention. Searching for a Friend for the End of the World. It's a Steve Carell movie with Keira Knightley where the world's about to end because an asteroid's going to hit it, and they're on a little road trip. It's a cute indie comedy that has a sad ending.
Yeah. And then as we get into my actual top 10, number 10, Robert Zemeckis' Flight, starring Denzel Washington. I think it might be Denzel Washington, might be my favorite performance of his. He plays an alcoholic airline pilot who manages to safely land the plane during a crisis, but he does it while he's drunk. And then the rest of the movie is him kind of trying to cover that up while everyone's treating him like a hero. It's a really interesting performance and a very, very cool movie. Probably the last really good Zemeckis movie. I'd have to double check his list to make sure, but yeah, really, really good movie. Great performance by Denzel. Number 9, Paul Thomas Anderson's The Master, with just incredible performances from Joaquin Phoenix, Philip Seymour Hoffman, rest in peace, and Amy Adams. All just amazing in this movie. Very cool. Number 8, as you have already mentioned, Silver Linings Playbook. Not much more I can say about it, but yeah, I love the performances. I love that it just ends in a dance contest. A great climax to that movie. Good comeback for De Niro. Cooper and Lawrence are amazing together, and Jackie Weaver also was good as the matriarch, if you will.
I will.
Good. Number 7, Ang Lee's journey film, Life of Pi, which is some of just the coolest. Oh, you hate Life of Pi.
No, I like Life of Pi. I like it a lot, but it gave me a full-blown panic attack in the theater. Like, I'm not joking.
Really?
The opening credits, it's just a small window into how my mind works. The opening credits are just, it's a montage of a bunch of different animals, like interesting-looking animals. And I got to thinking how short an animal's life is. And then I got to thinking how short human life is. And I couldn't breathe. So it took me like 20 minutes to get myself together. No, it's a good movie.
Okay, good. Okay, I was a little worried. But yeah, Life of Pi is great. I mean, some of the best visual effects. I mean, you'll see it's just a really cool journey, through... Where?
Well, they're on the ocean, aren't they? The guy and his tiger on a boat.
Yeah, I'm all thrown off, and I didn't expect that was where the conversation was.
Sorry.
But yeah, Life of Pi, very cool journey, great visual effects. The score is magnificent. I mean, it's a great movie. But from Ang Lee, one of our finest directors. Number 6, one that you mentioned earlier, Lincoln by Steven Spielberg. Another masterful performance by Daniel Day-Lewis, of course. Tommy Lee Jones also great in this movie. Sally Field is very good in this. All Oscar nominated. Day-Lewis, of course, won his third for this one. My number 5, Catherine Bigelow's Zero Dark 30. Again, you mentioned all the good things about it already. It's just a really, really cool movie. We need more from Catherine Bigelow, please. My number 4 is Michael Haneke's Amour, which is just a devastating film about a husband taking care of his wife after a stroke. Beautiful and sad movie, but just excellent. My number 3, also the aforementioned Beasts of the Southern Wild. Again, one of the best child performances you will ever see, and another just beautiful, uplifting, gorgeous movie. That shot of on the poster of her running through with the sparklers and everything is just kind of seared in my brain. And my number 2, also one that you mentioned before. I'm a big James Bond fan, and Skyfall, like I agree. Probably the second best James Bond movie. I mean, Casino Royale is my number 1 movie of 2006. Skyfall is my number 2 movie of 2012. I think Judi Dench is just incredible in this. Absolutely kills it. Javier Bardem, one of the best villains ever in a Bond movie. He and Daniel Craig have that one, that one scene together where Bond, implies that he's been with men before, which I think is just such a cool, cool little addition to the Daniel Craig version of the character. And I just think and Albert Finney in this is also really great. Just a lot of cool stuff going on in Skyfall. And I love the Adele song, of course, too. I think one of the better Bond theme songs.
Second best Daniel Craig Bond movie, and probably also the second best Home Alone movie.
That sounds right. Yeah. At the end when they're setting all the booby traps up around Bond's manor. Yeah, I think that's awesome. I mean, I know it's called Skyfall, but whatever. My number 1, as you mentioned earlier, is Argo. I was just really taken with this movie, the suspense of it, and I love movies about making movies, and I just thought the sort of
not really about making movies.
Not really about making a movie, but at least sort of about making a movie. But yeah, really taken with this movie. Got into the suspense of it, and like I said, knowing how it ends. You were still like kind of getting tensing up at it. I think Affleck's just a really really good filmmaker. Live by Night notwithstanding, I thought this was really great. And fun fact, I actually saw Skyfall and Argo. I did a double feature at the theater that night. Saw them. I remember seeing them both on the same night. My kid was really little. She was just a baby then, so I kind of had to double up my theater visits whenever I could. So saw them both on the same night. My favorite 2 movies of the year.
I do that like all the time. Almost every Friday I go and see 2 movies.
Oh, do you? Yeah. I don't do it as much as I used to. I don't like driving at night if I can help it. But
see, I don't have to drive.
Right.
And I don't. Also, just last thing, Alan Arkin, incredible in Argo. What a great Yeah, John Goodman. Incredible. Mm-hmm. All right. We don't know what we'll be back with, but we will be back next week. We're like on the home stretch almost here. We're getting close. We're at least between second and third base. So see you next week. Yeah. Jake, say hi to Dozer.
Dozer. Hi, buddy. Miss you.
You're such a good boy.